I wanted to take some time to share with you a wild tale from my recent vacation. Lots of people associate Florida with beaches and theme parks, but the swamps, especially the Everglades, are a hidden gem, in my opinion. About 6 months ago, in late summer, I took a trip down there with my friends. Eager to escape our routine lives, we were more drawn to the wilderness areas than a theme park atmosphere. So, we decided to sign up for a guided tour of the Everglades. We looked forward to the airboats and the chance to see something that we wouldn't normally see back home, like an alligator or something like that. On the day of our tour, the sun was out as we sped across the vast marshes of the Everglades. We were thrilled when we saw gators basking on the banks, their eyes just above the water. It was quite a sight. Perhaps an hour into our journey, right at sunset when the darkness was quickly descending upon the swamp, the boat's engine seemed to make a crazy noise, and then it sputtered and died. At first we thought it was a joke, but the look on our guide's face and the expletives coming from his mouth quickly told us otherwise. We city folk were definitely out of our element. Our guide, Gus, tried to calm us, saying it was a minor issue he'd handled before. Now, without the boat's motor humming in the background, the swamp was eerily silent, broken only by occasional splashes. We all looked around, trying to keep our minds preoccupied as Gus worked on the engine. Obviously, we were all totally clueless about the situation we were about to find ourselves in. As the night truly began to set in, the swamp sounds came alive. In the newly quiet surroundings, every noise seemed heightened. The stillness gave the swamp a weird and scary heaviness. Silly or not, we all agreed that we felt very vulnerable for some reason. Suddenly, a loud splash echoed in the water not too far from us. I can't tell you the exact size of whatever made the splash, but it wasn't a small critter. This wasn't a regular splash from a fish or even a gator. It felt deliberate. My eyes strained in the low light, searching for any sign of what made the splash. But the swamp gave up no secrets. Our guide Gus, meanwhile, continued his repairs oblivious to our growing anxiety. We felt trapped, like sitting ducks. Unfamiliar with the swamp's rules, we talked amongst ourselves, sharing that we all were feeling nervous. As for what was happening out there, that was something we couldn't figure out. Just as we thought things couldn't get any worse, a rumbling sound echoed in the swamp. The sound was deep, and then came crunching noises as if something heavy was making its way closer. I hissed Gus's name, hoping he had heard it too. But he was already busy with the engine, muttering curses. Panicking, I looked around, straining my eyes. As the moon peeked through the clouds, it illuminated the reality, revealing two piercing yellow eyes staring back from the bushes. It was obvious that they weren't a gator's eyes. Then my uncomfortable feeling turned into absolute horror when I saw a dark, massive figure moving behind the vegetation. The silhouette was chilling, a humanoid figure, tall as a tree, that seemed to be standing on two legs. It was draped in shadows, but I could make out the overall structure, which was vaguely human. Its head looked similar to a dinosaur or a lizard, complete with what seemed like sharp teeth gleaming in the moonlight. Our frantic whispers and panicked movements finally got Gus's attention. He looked up, a puzzled expression crossing his face before his eyes widened in sheer terror. Seeing the usually gruff Gus frightened really hit it home for us, but he seemed to recover quickly, urging us to keep quiet while he popped open compartment under the wheel and grabbed a shotgun. Meanwhile, the reptilian creature prowled on the edge of our visibility, almost toying with us. Strangely enough, it didn't approach the boat, but that didn't help the terror we felt knowing that we couldn't escape if we needed to. Gus finally managed to restart the engine, and he quickly and expertly steered us away from the horrible creature. Even when we got back to civilization, the encounter still felt unreal, and Gus? He remained tight-lipped, dismissing our questions with grunts, making it obvious that he didn't want to talk about it. Everyone went back to their routines, but something had changed. Our illusion of a safe and mundane life had been shattered. Even now, Every time I hear a bump in the night or a rustling in the bushes, I am back in that broken-down boat, watching the menacing glow of those yellow eyes against the Everglades. I may never truly know what was coming at us that night, but it's clear that we were merely guests and that the creature was 100% in charge. I wanted to share my experience with you, and I hope you can use it so that people know they aren't alone, because I know firsthand how seeing things like this can make you feel. So anyway, this is what happened. My mother lives in Ohio, and she had just turned 70. I figured I'd fly down to visit her as a birthday present. I should mention it was a dream of Mom's to live deep in the woods on a ton of land. Her dream came true. She lives in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by deep woods with no neighbors. While I was there, and after she went to bed, I would sneak out to smoke a cigarette. She would kill me if she knew I smoked. Anyway, one night, I went into the woods to burn one and get some fresh air. Everything was going great when out of nowhere I got a whiff of the most rancid smell I've ever smelled in my entire life. It was like wet dog, burnt hair, and week-old garbage on steroids. My eyes immediately teared up. I was wondering if my mom was throwing trash out into the woods and turned on the flashlight on my phone. Looking for the trash, the smell kept getting worse and worse. I had to tuck my nose into my shirt, and even that was barely helping. I was about to give up when I heard a huge thud on the ground next to me. I flashed my light on it, expecting to find a large animal, but it turned out to be a huge rock. Confused, I started looking around me, wondering where this thing could have come from. Before I could complete the thought, I heard another boulder whiz by my head. I was seriously freaked out, so I charged in the direction the rock came from and yelled some profanities as intimidatingly as I could. The putrid smell overwhelmed me, and before I could turn back, I came face to face with a terrifying ape-like beast. It was like time froze. I saw its beady eyes, furry head, hairy body, and a face like a demonic caveman. I heard a huge growl that was deep, bellowing, and unlike anything I'd ever heard before. I sprinted away as fast as I could towards the house. The sounds that came out of this thing were awful, truly something out of a horror film. I will never forget the sound of its growl. As I ran, I could hear it coming after me from behind. The sounds of its grunts as it ran still haunt me to this day. I busted through the front door, slammed it behind me, and locked it. The second I turned the lock, the beast banged against the door. I had made it inside to safety by seconds. It continued to pound on the door, shaking the entire frame of the house. I had no idea what to do. I stepped back from the door in fear as the ape-like behemoth punched the door repeatedly. My mom came running out of her bedroom screaming, "What the hell is that?" I couldn't speak, and I was in fear for my life. We started grabbing tables, chairs, and heavy furniture and began barricading the front door. The sounds finally stopped, and I felt a rush of relief flood my body. My mom asked me again, "What the hell is that?" I didn't have the heart to tell her the truth, so I replied, "You have to be careful with bears around here, Mom." As soon as I finished my sentence, a huge slam came from the side of the house. I grabbed a kitchen knife, headed over to the sound, and prayed I wouldn't have to use the knife. The creature kept pounding on the house, and I could see the frame bending in more with each hit. If he kept this up long enough, the wall would cave in. "Where's Dad's shotgun?" I asked Mom in a panic. She froze. My dad was an avid hunter before he died, but my mom had never held a gun in her life. I grabbed her by the shoulders as the pounding of the walls continued. "Mom, this is life or death. Where's Dad's shotgun?" I don't know, she cried. "Maybe under the bed? I don't know." It was my last hope. I ran into her bedroom and began pulling everything out from under her bed. I threw a box, sewing machine, old yearbooks, my lacrosse trophies, and all sorts of other junk out of the way. Finally, I felt the cold of the shotgun barrel. I didn't even check if it was loaded. I ran straight back out into the living room where the creature was in full swing. Suddenly, silence filled the air. You could hear a pin drop in the house. I heard the wind howling outside and the trees rustling, but no more bashing. I slowly crept out the back door, shotgun at the ready, and crept over to the side of the house. I tried to be as quiet as possible, taking light steps and holding my breath. I could feel my heart pounding as I turned the corner. It was dark outside and I could barely see anything. I went over to where the creature was attacking, and the house was ripped to shreds. Debris littered the yard and chunks of wood were ripped off the house. Large portions were bashed in, and you could begin seeing a faint light from the inside of the house. Had the creature continued, he would have broken through the wall in a matter of minutes. Next thing I knew, I heard this terrifyingly aggressive roar from behind me. I whipped around and saw the beast sprinting towards me, his huge, lumbering arms propelling his giant body towards me at an impressive speed. I closed my eyes, bracing for impact, and fired a shot off. I heard the dirt as the creature stopped himself with force. Now, silence. I fired another shot and heard a strange whooping from the large ape. He took off into the forest so fast I could barely see. I listened to his giant footsteps until they disappeared into the night. I went back inside, Mom quivering in fear. "Is it dead?" she asked. "You have to be careful leaving food out around the bears, Mom," I replied, and went into the guest bedroom. I closed the door, fell to the floor, and contemplated how close we came to death. Was it a Bigfoot? If you're asking me, I'm thinking, what else could it possibly be? All right, let me tell you about this one time I had the weirdest encounter out in my cornfield. You're not going to believe this, but I swear on my life that every word is true. My family has been farming this land in north central Iowa for as long as I can remember. My dad passed it down to me, and it's been my life ever since. This happened last summer, just around the time when the corn's about ready for harvesting. The sun was setting, and I remember thinking that this is one of those evenings that makes you really glad to live out in the countryside. So I'm out there checking the crops, making sure everything's set for the next day. I always liked walking through the fields in the evening. Helps me clear my head. It was quiet, real quiet, except for the sound of the wind moving through the corn stalks. That's when I first heard it, a strange, soft, kind of shuffling sound coming from deeper inside the field. Now I've dealt with coyotes, raccoons, all sorts of critters trying to get into the crops, but this was different. It wasn't an animal sound and was almost like a rumbling that made the ground vibrate. At this point, I was more curious than anything, and I decided to check it out. I walked towards the sound, pushing through the rows of corn. The stalks were tall, over my head, so I couldn't see much ahead of me. As I got closer, that shuffling sound got more distinct, like something was moving, but trying to be quiet. Then, just as I was about to reach the area I was hearing it from, it stopped. Everything went silent. No sound, not even the wind. It was eerie. I stood there, listening, waiting for something to happen. That's when I saw it, through a break in the corn stalks. This thing was tall, way taller than any person, and it was sort of hunched over. Its skin was pale, almost white, and it looked sickly, emaciated. Its arms were long, reaching down almost to the ground, and its fingers, they were elongated, ending in what looked like claws. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My brain was fried looking at it. I mean, this was way beyond anything normal. The creature, or whatever it was, didn't seem to notice me at first. It was just standing there, swaying slightly, like it was sniffing the air. Then it turned its head towards me. It didn't have any hair, and its face was the most horrible thing. It had these deep, sunken eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light, and a mouth that was way too wide, filled with sharp teeth. I was just standing there staring at this thing, this crawler, as I've realized it is called. It made a sound then, a low, hissing noise, and started to move towards me, slowly, like it was being really cautious or maybe curious. I don't know. I couldn't tell what it was thinking. I've never felt my heart pound that hard. Every horror movie I'd ever seen was flashing through my mind, but this was real. This was happening to me. As it came closer, its movements were unnerving. It was jerky in the way it moved, sort of a lurching, awkward gait that made it seem like it was struggling with each step. But at the same time, it was quick, faster than you'd think looking at it. The way it moved among the corn stalks was almost snake-like, slithering and sliding. I could hear its breathing now, a raspy, labored sound. I remember thinking how this thing didn't seem right, like it didn't belong in our world. Its eyes never left me, those glowing, unblinking orbs that seemed to pierce right through me. I stumbled a few times, my boots getting caught in the dirt and the stalks cutting at my face and hands. Each time I feared it would be right on top of me, but I kept getting up, kept pushing forward. I could see the edge of the cornfield and my barn in the distance, the safe haven. The thought of reaching my truck, getting out of there, was the only thing driving me. But then, I made a fatal mistake. I looked back, just a quick glance over my shoulder, but that was enough. The creature was closer than I thought, just a few yards away. That's when I noticed something else. It wasn't just moving towards me. It was mimicking my movements. When I sped up, it sped up. When I slowed, it slowed, like it was playing some twisted game. I turned back around and pushed myself harder. My lungs were burning, my legs aching, but fear is a powerful motivator. I burst out of the cornfield, stumbled into the open field. That's when I heard it, a loud, piercing shriek that I know came from the creature. It was a sound full of anger and frustration, like it was annoyed that I'd escaped. None of it made sense, but I didn't stop to think. I just ran to my truck, fumbled with the keys, and drove out of there as fast as I could. I didn't even look back until I was miles away and off the farm. When I finally stopped, my whole body was shaking. I just sat there in the truck, trying to think about it all and catch my breath. Obviously, I had to head back home eventually. But when I did, I went right inside and straight to bed. It's hard to describe how you feel after an encounter like that. You start to doubt yourself, wonder if your mind was going crazy. But ultimately, I know what I saw, and I know I never want to see it again. I'm writing this from Serenity Heights, my new home here in Arizona. It's one of those fancy retirement complexes you see in brochures. You know, the kind with the rows and rows of identical apartments and perfectly manicured gardens. I was hesitant to give up my home and move here, but it just became too much to take care of. I had heard varying opinions of retirement places, but I've got to say, I like it here. But there is something about it I want to share. Every evening without fail, I find myself in the common area, staring at a chessboard. It's not much of a crowd puller, but there's a few of us who get together after dinner and play. But one night in particular, things got real odd. I had just finished a game and everyone was packing up and getting ready to go back to their rooms before bed. I sat at the table for a little while longer to watch the sun set through the window opposite the chess table. The common room grew quiet as everyone filtered out. I was going to go with them in a minute, but then it all turned eerie. A chill swept through the room. It was the kind of cold that crawls into your bones. The lights flickered just briefly, and I thought I heard the sound of whispers. By then, all the other residents had retired to their rooms, and the staff were far away in their office spaces. And still, I felt like someone was watching me. I didn't have much time to question my senses because when I turned and looked around the room, I saw this foggy figure near the doorway. It was shapeless and translucent. I don't know how to describe it. It was definitely shaped like a human, but I couldn't see a face or any other distinguishing characteristics. It didn't even see if it had arms or legs. It almost looked like one of those bedsheet ghosts that kids used to dress up as for Halloween when they didn't have money for a store-bought costume. Except the light seemed to pass right through it. I pushed my chair back so I could get up, but then one of the black pawns on the chessboard moved. I'd swear on my life, it moved on its own. I hadn't touched it. The window in front of me was closed, and there wasn't any other way the pawn could have been moved. Something moved it because it certainly wasn't me, and I was the only one in the room, or so I thought. I got up from the table and hurried back to my room. I didn't know what to think of the strange encounter, but it wasn't long before I drifted off to sleep. The strange, eerie feeling I had experienced in the common area didn't follow me back to my room. In fact, I started questioning if I had even seen the ghost at all. Perhaps it was just my tired old brain playing a joke on me. I decided not to share this evening tale with my fellow residents, fearing they'd judge me insane. But then, these strange occurrences started happening regularly. Each night, at roughly the same time, the common room would get inexplicably colder and the lights would flicker. Sometimes I could hear the whispers, and sometimes I couldn't. Once in a while, I would see that figure make an appearance too. Of course, no one else was around to see it, so I didn't have any proof. But here's where it gets even stranger. The pieces on the chessboard would move by themselves. I wasn't sure if it was the ghostly figure or something else, but it seemed like someone unseen was hoping for a game of chess. Now's the part where you're really going to think I've gone crazy, but I started playing against the ghost. Every night I played, and every night my supernatural partner played right back. It took some getting used to, but that ghost was a better chess player than most of the residents here. Hell, sometimes it'd even beat me. I know what it sounds like. It sounds like I'm just some crazy old man suffering from dementia, but I'm not. My mind's as sharp as it ever was. I finally told my family what had been going on after a while. I didn't think it was weird anymore. I was more fascinated than anything. However, they didn't seem to share my sentiment. I remember each of their faces. My son looked spooked, my granddaughter was confused, and my great-grandson seemed strangely excited about the idea of his great-granddad living with a ghost. They were skeptical, but my son decided to look up the old records of the retirement home. Much to our astonishment, he found several black and white photographs of the past residents. One picture stood out among the rest. It was a photograph of an elderly gentleman bearing a joyful smile and seated next to a pristine wooden chessboard. That was him, I knew it. Nothing else made sense. In all my years of life, I had never encountered a ghost before. I'm not sure what I expected, but this was definitely not it. This was more like meeting up with an old friend. We couldn't share words, but we shared our time and our love of the game. And thanks to my son's research, I had a name to call him, Stephen. Stephen and I have continued with our nightly games. I am sure the staff think I'm a big old loony when I stay in the commons late at night and play chess by myself. But I'm not by myself. That's the brilliant part. It sounds crazy to say, but Steve has become a good friend of mine, and I look forward to our games and hope to be able to play many more. A couple of months ago, I explored a location that still sends chills down my spine whenever I think about it. It was just an abandoned subway tunnel beneath the heart of the city's underbelly. I always liked places that were a little dangerous, a little difficult to access, but I never went too far. Now I've been an adrenaline junkie from as far back as I can recall. The thrill of being somewhere you aren't supposed to be, the clandestine nature of it all, never ceases to send a rush through my system. There's something exhilarating about the secrets that forbidden places hold, like an abandoned subway tunnel. It's like a time capsule filled with stories discarded by a city always rushing to the future. Armed with a camera, a flashlight, and the kind of foolish bravery reserved only for the young or the insane, I made my way past the faded no-entry signs and into the mouth of the tunnel. The outside world faded away behind me. The buzz of nighttime city life was replaced by the deep silence that subterranean spaces hold. It was just the sound of my boots on the gravel, the periodic pat of water droplets, and the sound of my footsteps. Even that early on, I could tell there was a certain oddness about the place. It was more than just the dilapidated architecture, the peeling paint and rusty rails. I've visited enough forgotten locations to be familiar with the eeriness of decay. But there was a strange feel to the place, something I can only describe as an unsettling hum, like the place was alive with anticipation. I shrugged it off as nerves and carried on, documenting the graffiti-laden walls and scattered debris throughout the tunnel. Now, darkness in a confined place is a whole different beast. An all-encompassing, tangible darkness, the sort that swallows light and sound, making everything feel too far and too close at once. And the silence. It bears down on you like a physical weight. I decided to shake off the increasing tension in the air and pressed on. The narrow beam of the flashlight bobbed up and down, casting long shadows on the grime-covered walls. I'd been there for about an hour, maybe more, when I felt an abrupt temperature drop. It was so sudden that my breath frosted in the air in front of me. Now, I've heard of sudden cold spots in haunted locations, but this was different. It was accompanied by this low-grade vibration, like a faint but constant static buzz that I could feel in my bones. That's around the time I started hearing the noise. It was a clicking sound, like a dog's nails on a hard floor. I stood frozen. The only source of light in the tunnel was my flashlight. Anything could be around me in the shadows, and I likely wouldn't see it until it was already on top of me. I strained my ears to triangulate the origin of the sound. The echoes muffled it, a whispery tap, 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 bouncing around in the dark, growing both closer and further away. Part of me wanted to get the hell out, but another part of me wanted to investigate the strange sound. I ignored my better judgment, and I decided to dig deeper. I shoved the creeping fear back down, insisted on moving forward, driven by the audacity of my own curiosity. And then I saw it. The narrow beam of the flashlight caught something that I can only describe now as the embodiment of my deepest nightmares. At first, I thought it was a human, tall, gaunt, and pale as the grave. It lurched awkwardly about, crawling on all fours like some kind of ghoul. Its emaciated, naked body bore a disgusting resemblance to a deceased man's, but it was the face that etched itself into my mind. The black, empty eyes and the large, gaping mouth with no discernible nose between. Its face was a hollow expanse of terrifying nothingness. A chill swept over me. My blood ran cold, and for a moment, everything was silent. In an instinctual flash of sanity, I bolted. The clicking sounds echoed eerily in the tunnel, growing louder and then fading, as though the creature were pursuing me. My flashlight bobbed wildly around, casting its light on every crevice I sprinted past, each shadow seeming to harbor its own lurking menace. And then pure, blissful, blinding daylight. I burst out of the tunnel's mouth, the harsh intrusion of the city's noise bringing me a profound sense of relief. I couldn't help but turn back one last time, peering into the impenetrable blackness of the tunnel. Nothing. Only silence and the shadowy abyss. I spent days after that poring over every possible explanation. Was it a hallucination? A side effect of my adrenaline-riddled brain and the dark and echoey tunnel? Maybe the oxygen down there was tainted. That would have been a relief in some ways. That would mean the creature didn't actually exist. But the raw fear I felt was real. I tried to move past it and let that experience become a distant memory, but then I heard another story from someone else. According to local legends and online forums, the creature I saw was a thing called the Crawler. Accounts of sightings are thankfully sparse, but it provided me with a cold sense of validation. There are monstrous creatures out there that we are sharing the world with, whether we want to deny their existence or not.